Hello and welcome to this month's drawing tutorial. This month I'm going to revisit some old ground for those of you who may not have seen and draw a portrait. So once you have your reference material, then take some strips of paper or a frame and decide how you want to crop it. Once you've done that, measure the picture's width and length. So this is 3.25 and the width 4. Then you need to measure to find the center and then give yourself a couple of more handy marks. I'll divide it into quarters. Then I'll do the same thing on the side. Voila. And then I'm going to translate those carefully across to the opposite side. Now you need to set up your drawing paper. And the important thing is that you have a frame that's proportional to your reference material. So then you're going to have to set up a simple equation to find the proportion. I know that the width is 3.5 and the length was 4. Let me just choose one side arbitrarily. Let's say that I wanted the length of my drawing to be 8. And then this down here, the width, I don't know. So I'm just going to call it X. To find what this missing side has to be to keep it proportional to this side, all you have to do is cross multiply. So I'd get 3.5x equals 32. Divide out the 3.5 from both sides, and I'm left with x equals 32 divided by 3.5, which is 9.14. Then my next step would be to draw those lengths on my drawing paper, which I've already done. And then I translated those measurements so that they would correspond to my drawing paper. So I have 1, 2, 3 over here, just as I have a 1, 2, 3 over here. But let's move forward now to using that graphing system to accurately transcribe this drawing onto our drawing paper. So the whole point of making the graphs is so that you don't have to guess about where anything goes. I can just use my straight edge and I can see exactly where the bottom of the chin lines up in terms of my graph, which is almost exactly halfway between E and F. So I'm going to go down to my drawing paper here and I'll give a little mark halfway between E and F. Let's do the top of the head. Well, this part line is going to be halfway between 1 and 2. And how far down is it? About a quarter of the way down from the bottom before A. So I can just visually divide this space from the top to A into 4 pieces and decide that that part is about right here. So this is the top of the head. I don't have to measure every single line, but the more measurements I give myself, the more precise my drawing is going to be. You see? Then I can fill in the curve from there. And it's very handy, and it's actually quite fast because I don't have to make any guesses. So I think that I've shown you enough of the process now that I can move forward and do the rest of the sketch of the basic outline of the head off camera, and I'll come back to it when it's time to move forward. When you have the rough drawing sketched out like this, all your lines are placed, then you want to protect some of these really fine lines that you see in the hairs. And I like to use a stylus, and I just use that stylus to indent the paper here and there and create the illusion of some flyaway hairs and highlights in the hair that will help to add some realism. So now let's move on to step 2, putting down the base skin tone. For the base skin tone for Caucasian flesh, I'm going to use a 2H pencil, and I'm going to follow the curve of the face and always follow the same direction as I put it down. And don't be afraid to angle the paper if you need to make it easier. Alright, now I'm just working to fill in this tone for the first pass. And I'm not going to avoid the eyebrows or the hairline. I'm going right up over it, using the pencil on the side, never the point, and that way my lines will be easy to disguise with the blending in the next step. But I do want to be aware of the shadow shapes on the face. When that tone is in place, I'm going to use a chamois cloth and smooth everything out. I use little circle strokes, and all of that tone is smoothed away. I'm going to go back with my 2H again, repeat that process, this time focusing even more on the shadow shapes and not going into those highlights. Now, I don't want to over darken my shadows, but I do want to get them dark enough. So I'm going to make myself a little reference here, and I'm going to darken up tone right next to the darkest shadow until I match the shadow on the card. And I can do the same thing for the midtones, and I can do the same thing for the highlights, or as many different tones as I want to. And now I have a really good guide. Ooh, see how much darker I'm going to have to get to match that shadow and even the midtone? But this will give me a good reference point that I can keep right up against my picture, and it will show me exactly what tone I need to match. Another thing, before I go much farther, I want to protect this edge of the face with Frisket film so that I don't have to make artificial lines. So now when I go over the edge, you see I can go right over that tape, and when I peel up the tape I'm going to have a very clean, even edge that looks much more natural. Alright, so I'm going to fill this tone in, and the second time I blend, I'm going to do it with a tortillon, which will also give me a smooth finish, but which won't pick up nearly so much of the medium. And for the very light areas, you can just use this stomp and use that as not only a blending tool, but almost a pencil that puts the tone down for you, and it will put the tone down very smoothly. So I'm going to darken up the shadows of the face here, and when the skin tone is ready, I'm going to move into the different features, the eyes, the lips, the nose. At this stage the drawing is going to look really strange, but you have the various skin tones in place and you're ready to start moving into the features. So I'm going to get a nice sharp 2B pencil ready. I'm going to start in the eyes. So I start by strengthening those outlines. There's usually a strong upper lid line, and then the upper line of the eye is really dark because that's where the lashes are growing. And then the iris, I strengthen around in there, and just re-strengthen where that pupil goes. I can even start to fill it in with a little bit of tone, and that will help me see better if the eye is looking in the right direction. And I'm not darkening anything up as much as it needs to be at the end yet. I want to still be able to make changes, and that's going to be harder to do once those lines are really set in stone and very, very dark. Okay, then I can start to scribble in the iris, and the rim of the iris is darker. Then you have these scribbly lines on the inside, and then the pupil is extremely dark. Then pick up your stomp or tortillon. See how I start in the dark corner, and then I blend my way outward to the white of the eye, and that gives me an easy way of adding some tone without making it too dark like a pencil could do. Alright, so you can see how the eye gradually comes to life. So that's one eye done. I'll do the same to the other eye, but let's move down to the nose. The nose is much simpler than the eye. It's basically a matter of darkening up under the nostrils and on the side of the nostrils. And importantly, you want the tip of the nose to look like it's sticking out, almost like a ball. And so you need to add a little bit of shading on the underside and keep a highlight on the point of the nose that's pointing farthest out. So the very tip, there should be a highlight. But see how I just used the pencil on the side and I gradually build up those contrasts. Then I'll drop the pencil, go in with this stomp and soften those lines, and then I'll blend the tip of the nose here with little circle strokes that disguise those lines. I might need to darken up those tones, but that's the process that you go through for the nose. And you go through the same sort of process for the lips. The lips have more apparent lines, especially the line between the lips and the line that edges up against the open mouth. Then you're going to see some dark cracks in the lips often. You can just add some tone, darken up the corners, and then let your stomp do the rest. So I'm going to pull it down following the curve of the lip. See? And the lips need to be quite a bit darker than the surrounding skin so that they can stand out and look different from the other skin tone. So it's the same process that you took on the initial skin pass. You put down a base tone, then you go back in and you darken up as needed. Let the lips be sort of subtle, and don't forget that really important line of reflected light that separates the lips from the chin. Okay, so let me push these lips and the rest of the face up a little farther and we'll come back for the hair. Here's the portrait so far. So now I'll remove the tape. Very good. Now I wanted to move into the hair, and I'm going to start by blocking in the tones in the hair. You can squint at the hair to make it easier to see where those darks should be, but I'm just going to basically sketch in a few scribbly lines here and there to begin with. That will show the direction of the hair. And then I can go back with the pencil on the side and start to fill those in more. So I'm just going to still follow the direction of the hair growth. But now you can see the importance of those lines that I pulled out with the stylus. You don't want the hair to start to look like a helmet. So you can do some breakaway hairs at the edge and do some short choppy strokes at transition areas. So here it starts to turn a little bit lighter, and up here it's lighter still. So I'll have some choppy strokes. So you see how you just fill in, and I'm not drawing any individual hairs at this point. I'm focusing on the blocks of tone. Now follow that process to fill in the basic tone on all of the hair, and then you can go back with the stump and fill in a few of those rough areas. But remember, you do want the hair to contrast to the skin. The skin is as smooth as we can make it on this paper, so it's just fine if you want to leave the hair a little bit more rough, and then it will look like a different texture. Then your second step here is to darken up some of those contrasts the same way that you did for the skin. So you take a second pass, you pick and choose a few places to go in darker, and then you're going to use a light, sharp pencil like an H and go around the outside of the head, making some of those flyaways, just like this. So let me go off camera again and finish up this hair, then I'll come back to you for the close. Now here is the finished head. So now let's do the last thing, and that's that little dress. It's a white dress, so it's going to be pretty fast. So the first thing that you want to do is indicate where those wrinkles are. I'm going to use an HB and give myself very, very light guidelines. Then I'm going to use my H pencil turn the drawing a little bit and add the shading to the shadow side. Just like that. Now it's time for the chamois. I'm going to avoid the hair pretty well. And then with that dirty chamois, I'm going to add the light indication of some of the shadows in the highlight side. Then I'll redarken my fold here. And I'm still using my graph to lay in these folds accurately. When the second pass is done, I blend with the tortillon. Alright, so then I'll go in and add the last bit of darks as well as these details in the lace. And when you're doing work like this, keep your stomp in one hand and your pencil in the other, because you'll be constantly switching back and forth, back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the clothing off camera. I'll come back to you one last time and we'll look at the finished piece. Now here's the final portrait after everything is done, including the clothes. And you can see that it's really just a matter of taking your time, working step by step, starting with those large shapes, and then working inward to develop the small details. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of getting your large shapes correct before you ever start working on the details. If you can just master that one skill, then you're going to see a vast improvement in your drawings. So that's where we're going to leave it for the month's drawing tutorial, and now we're going to push forward to this month's painting tutorial. Hello and welcome to this month's painting tutorial. This month we're going to paint a rather large landscape. I'm using this piece as my jumping off point, but I need to change a few things. I really like the color, but I don't like the composition. This bright white barn is right in the center, so I want it to be moved over a bit. And I don't like this big bush. There's just too much of it. But if I just crop it in a bit like this, the composition is strengthened. So I've already gone ahead and sketched it on the watercolor paper, and I'm ready to start painting. So I'm going to start with the back. Remember, when you paint a watercolor, you always paint from back to front, because the watercolors are transparent, and so they layer on each other really well, but you can't paint light on top of dark. You have to preserve your lights. So start with the background elements, the sky, and then paint your way forward in the picture plane. I'm going to start by using a big 2-inch brush and just wetting down the entire sky. You want that watercolor to be nice and even. Don't worry too much about being precise where you meet the mountains, but you're going to give yourself more control by just wetting the elements that you want to paint and keeping the others dry. Because remember, the watercolor is going to want to flow into the wet areas. Now I'm just trying a few different swatches, testing them to see how accurate I'm getting, and then I'm going to put it down in nice even color. Alright, now I'm paying attention to my reference material as I paint, because there isn't an even colored sky. The corners are darker, and then in the middle there's a large, practically white area. So I want to stay true to that and only put color down where I see it. And then for that cloud effect, you saw me use a little bit of spray. I can also go in with a damp brush, painting wet on wet, and that will give me some of those natural cloudy patterns. I'll let it dry completely, and then we'll come back and push down. Once your sky is all dry, then you can move down and start painting the mountains. Now there's usually several layers of mountains when you're painting landscape scenes like this, so just choose the one that's farthest back. Match that tone. It's really similar to the sky tone. And then if you have drawn the line of the mountains already, all you need to do is carefully outline the top ridge, just like this. And then before that has a chance to dry, you're going to wash it right down into the other mountains. And follow that all the way across. Then you need to let that dry completely, otherwise you're going to find that the next layer of mountains will bleed with the color of this farthest layer. So always stop and wait for your colors to dry completely between layers. So that's all there is to it, and now I'm going to let that dry. When that first mountain range is done, you're just going to move forward in the picture plane, and keep in mind that the mountains should get darker as you come forward. But there's something a little tricky here because I've added some different mountains. So I'm going to stick to this color scheme but make these shapes. Go ahead and paint that next mountain range right over the top of the first one using the same techniques that you did before. As you come closer, you might have tiny little details like little tiny bumps that look like tree tops. You can use the handle of your brush to put those in here and there. And that way it won't look overworked, but the eye will still see those tiny little details. As you work to fill in those shapes, use the advantage of your large brush and paint with as few strokes as you possibly can use. And that will give you a smooth, professional look. Oh, now I can see that I missed one mountain range, so I'm going to have to paint those in a little bit later. So let that dry and then we'll come back and do some more work on the mountains. Now I have the blue of the mountains in pretty good condition, so I'm going to go ahead with a green and wash over in the background here. And it's the same process, just make sure that your blue is dry. And it's important that you match not only the color, but the intensity. And to make it all really even, I'll go right over the top of the blue and lay that color down just like this. Another thing that I want to do though, while I'm waiting for that to dry, is I'm going to go ahead and protect this little church building with some masking fluid, and that will make it easier for me to paint smooth coats without having to work around this little building. So I'll just let that dry, let the paint dry, and come back and work on down. Okay, everything's nice and dry here now, so I'm going to add just a little bit of detail on that last hill. And then I'll shift back to the other photo and do some more work on these foreground bushes up here. And I can put that in right up next to the church. Up at the top you see more of a cerulean blue, so while the color is still wet I'm going to touch into it with a cerulean. Then I'll work with the brush on the side and put in the base tone of those bushes. Some of the textures you want to make themselves. So in these bushes up here, we're just going to lightly spritz, which will encourage some natural color flow. Okay, so we're getting close here. Alright, now I'm going to move up into the green of this grass. So I'm going to go to a larger brush and mix up my greens, and then I'll paint right over the top of these background trees. But I do want to avoid the trail because that's white. And as I paint this grass, I'm going to mix in a few different colors. So there's some yellows up top. And I'll give it a little bit of a spritz to keep the paper from drying out and to help with an interesting texture. Here and here, I've got some interesting greens slicing in. Now here I'm using some stripes to blend the two different greens up. And over here I'm going right over the top so that I get a nice smooth even edge. Now I'm going to spray it again, let those colors mix a little bit more, and I'll tilt the board so that they'll run together even more. And then I'm going to let that dry and come back to you, and we'll start doing the middle ground elements, the trees, the building, and of course these leaves that box it all together. When your grass is dry, you can put the elements that go on top in. So one thing I'm going to do is put in this side bush, and I'll protect my sky so I don't get spatters all over. And I'm going to moisten the area first and then spatter in those bushes. So I need to get plenty of paint on the board, and once you have the paint spatters there, you can help them to move around by spraying again with a little bit more water. Boop. And then if you need more control, go in after that and fill in some of the gaps with your brush. But you see how you use those 3 different techniques to get the paint on the board efficiently, and then also give yourself control for the details. You don't want everything to be covered, so leave some white space. And for even finer details, you can use the brush handle and use that as a scribbler. With this tree done, we've come to the fiddly portion of the painting. So I'm going to remove this masking fluid and then show you how to go about painting the trees and the building. So let's start from behind and then work our way up to these trees. For the building, I just need to match those darks. Notice that I'm laying the shadow down as one big piece. I'll let that dry and then soften it a little bit to blend out the darks. But in the meantime, I'm going to move on to the roof. For the roof, I'm going to use a flat, the largest one that I can for the area, and then paint that down just like so. For those skinny little windows, I'm going to go to a small round or even a rigger brush. So I'm just going to carefully fill in with my dark. Now if there was shading on the building, I would do that shading first and then finish up with the dark patches over the top, so that I'd be layering the dark on top of the lighter color. I'll just finish up those windows off camera and do the same sort of thing over here. But let's move to the trees next. They don't even look green, they look more purple. So I'm mixing up a purpley green. I'm switching to a round, and for the tree, I'm going to use a bouncy stippling brush like this and just let the brush paint a lot of the outer detail of the tree for me. So instead of trying to work my way around and paint every little crevice and branch that I see, I'll just kind of let the brush do its thing and create the impression of the tree. And then here and there at the top, it goes more noticeably green. So I'll just bounce in some of that green color and let it mix with the wet purple. And that's really all there is to it. The last thing is a little bit of a tree trunk. So I'll do my tree trunks with a rigger and just pull it down through that wet paint. Just like so. So let me do that finishing work and come back to you one last time with the finished piece. Alright, now here's the finished painting. I'll just pan up so you can see the sky. So all I've done to finish it up is add the color to the trees in the foreground here, And then after the color was dry, I used a damp brush to dampen the top and then pull a little bit of that color out so that you would get the effect that there was a darker base and then some light bringing some more color to the top of each tree. So that concludes this month's painting tutorial, and I hope that you've learned something about painting landscapes. It's really just a matter of knowing when to let the paint rest and then come back into it with another layer. I'll leave you to your own studios now and wish you the very best of luck in your painting endeavors. Thanks so much for watching.